He can't pay, so he doesn't eat. That's the rule. The manager's voice cut clean through the morning clatter of plates and silverware, sharp enough to make a few customers glance up from their coffee cups. Ava Brooks didn't answer right away. She stood behind the counter, a ceramic mug warming her palm, the smell of burnt toast and cheap diner coffee hanging thick in the air. Outside, rain streaked down the wide glass windows, blurring the neon Opian sign into a tired glow. The old man stood just beyond the door, shoulders hunched, coat damp at the edges, like he'd been standing there longer than anyone noticed. Ava set the mug down slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the entrance. Ava! The manager snapped again, lower this time, a warning threaded under the word. Don't start. She paused with her hand on the door handle, feeling the cold seep through the metal. For a second, she could hear her own heartbeat, steady but louder than it should have been. Then she pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead, soft but clear. The old man looked up, eyes tired but alert in a way that didn't match the rest of him. Rain tapped against the sidewalk behind him. Morning, Ava said, her voice even. He hesitated like he wasn't sure the word was meant for him. I don't have, he began, but she cut him off gently. You don't need to say it. She stepped aside and held the door wider. Inside, a couple at the counter exchanged looks. Someone near the back leaned forward, watching. The manager exhaled loudly, already turning away like he didn't want to witness what came next. Ava guided the man to a booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking as he lowered himself down. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor, forming a small, spreading circle. Ava grabbed a towel from behind the counter and knelt briefly to dab it up without a word. Coffee, she asked. He nodded once. She poured a fresh cup, steam curling into the dim light, and set it in front of him. His hands hovered around it, not touching yet, as if savoring the heat before it was even his. Ava moved back to the register, pulled a few crumpled bills from the tip jar she kept tucked beneath it, and slid them into the drawer. The manager saw it. Of course he did. He always did. You planning to do that every day now? He muttered, stepping closer, voice low enough not to carry but sharp enough to sting. Ava didn't look at him. Just today, she said quietly, though they both knew that wasn't true. She grabbed a plate, added eggs, toast, and a side of hash browns, arranging it with more care than the rush usually allowed. When she set the plate down in front of the old man, he finally met her eyes directly. There was something steady there, something that didn't belong to someone who'd been turned away as often as he probably had. Thank you, he said, but the way he said it felt measured, almost deliberate. Ava gave a small nod and stepped back, letting him eat. Around them, the diner resumed its rhythm, forks scraping, coffee pouring, low conversations blending into a constant hum. But there was a subtle shift in the air, like something unseen had settled into the room. The manager returned to his clipboard, shaking his head, but he didn't say anything else. Ava moved through her tasks, refilling cups, wiping tables, calling out orders, yet her attention kept drifting back to the booth by the window. The old man ate slowly, not like someone starving, but like someone choosing each bite. At one point, he paused and glanced around the diner, taking in the scuffed floors, the flickering light above the counter, the way Ava moved from table to table without missing a step. When he finished, he folded the napkin neatly beside his plate. No crumbs left behind. No rush to leave. Ava approached again, picking up the plate. You can stay a while, she said. No one's kicking you out. His lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. I wasn't worried about that, he replied. She tilted her head, studying him for a second, sensing something she couldn't quite name. Outside, the rain began to slow, the drops thinning against the glass until the street beyond came back into focus. A black sedan passed by, then another, tires hissing against wet pavement. Ava glanced out briefly, then back at the man. You come by here often? She asked. He looked down at his empty cup, then back up at her. Only when I need to see something, he said. Ava frowned slightly, not understanding, but before she could ask more, the bell above the door rang again as a new customer stepped in, shaking off an umbrella. She turned instinctively toward the counter, slipping back into motion. When she looked back a moment later, the old man was still there, watching her with that same steady gaze. And something about it made her feel like this wasn't just another morning. He reached into his coat, slowly, like he was about to show her something. The fabric of his coat shifted with a faint, deliberate rustle as his hand moved inside. Not hurried, not uncertain, just precise. And Ava felt something tighten in her chest without knowing why as she stood there holding the empty plate. Her fingers still warm from the dish, the diner noise fading into a dull background hum that seemed to stretch the moment longer than it should have been. And when his hand came back out, it was not shaking, not hesitant. It carried a small object between his fingers, something metallic that caught the pale morning light filtering through the rain-streaked window. And for a second she thought it was just loose change, maybe a coin he had forgotten, but he placed it carefully on the table instead of handing it to her. And the sound it made was soft but clean, heavier than a coin should sound against the laminate surface. Ava glanced down, then leaned slightly closer, her brow tightening as she tried to make sense of it. It was a watch, old but not worn out, the leather strap dark and smooth, the face polished enough to reflect a faint outline of her own face. And even without knowing much about watches, she could tell it did not belong to someone who had nothing. "You dropped this earlier," he said, his voice calm, like he had all the time in the world. Ava blinked, shaking her head lightly. "No, that is not mine," she replied, instinctively pushing it a few inches back toward him. But he did not take it, his hand resting on the edge of the table instead, fingers relaxed. "I know," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made her pause, not confused, not surprised, just certain, like he was stating a fact that did not need explaining. Ava straightened slightly, glancing toward the counter where the manager was pretending not to watch while clearly watching everything. Then back at the man. "Then why are you showing it to me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, not defensive, just careful. He looked at the watch for a moment, then back at her. "Because most people would have taken it," he said, and the words landed in a way that made the air feel different, heavier somehow. Ava let out a small breath through her nose, almost a quiet laugh, but not quite. "I am not most people," she replied, and she meant it simply, without pride, without performance, just the truth as she knew it. He studied her again, that same steady gaze that felt like it was measuring something deeper than what she said. Then he picked up the watch and slipped it back into his coat with the same controlled motion, like placing something important exactly where it belonged. Ava shifted her weight slightly, unsure why the interaction felt like more than it was, like she had just answered a question she had not heard asked. "You should eat more tomorrow," she said after a second, defaulting back to something normal, something grounded. "You barely touched the toast." He gave a faint nod, almost amused. "Maybe tomorrow I will," he said. And again there was that word, tomorrow, spoken like it already existed in his plans. Ava glanced toward the door as another customer came in, bringing in a gust of cool air that carried the fading scent of rain. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, clouds thinning just enough to let a pale strip of sunlight stretch across the wet pavement. She turned back to the table, but he was already reaching for his coat, not in a rush, just finishing. "You do not have to leave yet," she said, though she was not sure why she said it. He stood slowly, straightening his shoulders in a way that subtly changed how he looked, less fragile, more defined, like the weight he carried was not physical at all. "I have seen what I needed today," replied, and the sentence lingered longer than it should have. Ava felt a flicker of something she could not name, curiosity, maybe, or the sense that she had just missed something important hiding in plain sight. He stepped toward the door, each movement quiet, controlled, and when he reached it he paused for just a fraction of a second, his hand resting on the handle, not turning it yet, as if considering something. Then he looked back at her, not with gratitude this time, not exactly, but with something steadier, something that felt almost like recognition. "Same time tomorrow," he said, not asking, and before she could respond, the bell chimed as he pushed the door open and stepped out into the thinning rain. Ava stood there for a moment, though there were only 2 customers inside, both halfway through their meals. He gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Rush is not coming anytime soon," he said, then added, "and neither is your friend, so do not start giving away food again today." Ava tightened her grip slightly on the rag in her hand, then released it, forcing her shoulders to stay relaxed. "I heard you yesterday," she said, keeping her voice even. He paused for a moment, studying her like he was deciding whether to push further, then shook his head and walked off, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and grease. Ava exhaled slowly, turning toward the coffee pot, pouring a fresh batch even though the current one was still half full, the routine grounding her just enough to quiet the restless feeling she could not explain. The bell above the door stayed silent, each minute stretching longer than the last, and then, just as she began to convince herself he was not coming, it rang, soft but clear. Ava looked up immediately, faster than she meant to, but it was not him, just a man in a business suit checking his phone as he stepped inside. She forced her attention back to work, greeting him, taking his order, moving through the motions, but something in her chest shifted slightly, not disappointment exactly, just a quiet recognition that whatever yesterday had been, it might not repeat. Time passed. The diner filled a little more, plates clattered, orders were called out. The rhythm picked up, and Ava found herself caught in it again, moving quickly, efficiently, almost forgetting about the door entirely until it opened once more without the bell ringing this time. Just a soft push, like someone had learned how to enter without drawing attention. Ava turned, slower this time, not expecting anything. And there he was, standing just inside the doorway, coat dry today, posture the same, but somehow different, like he carried himself with a little more intention. Her breath caught for half a second before she covered it with a small nod. "Morning," she said, the word landing softer than yesterday. He returned the nod, stepping inside fully, his eyes scanning the diner briefly before settling back on her. "It seems I am not too late," he said, and there was that same calm certainty in his voice. Ava gestured toward the booth without thinking. "It is still yours," she replied, and as he walked toward it, a couple of customers glanced up, not because of how he looked, but because of how he moved, steady, deliberate, like he was exactly where he intended to be. Ava grabbed a mug before he even sat down, pouring coffee as if she had been expecting him all along. When she placed it in front of him, he did not hesitate this time, his hands wrapping around the cup immediately, taking in the warmth. "You came back," she said, not as a question, more like confirming something to herself. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "I said I would," he answered simply. Ava gave a faint smile, the kind that did not fully show but softened her eyes just enough. She moved back to the counter, reaching for the order pad out of habit, then paused, realizing she already knew what he would need. Eggs, toast, hash browns, the same as yesterday. She started preparing it without writing anything down. The motion smooth, automatic, but her attention stayed half on him, noticing small things now. The way he sat straighter than most of the customers, the way he observed without staring, the way he did not rush. When she brought the plate over, he nodded once in thanks. Then before she could turn away, he spoke again. "Tell me something," he said, and his tone shifted just slightly, not demanding, not casual, just focused. Ava paused, one hand still resting lightly on the edge of the table. "What kind of place do you think this is?" he asked, and for a moment she thought he meant the diner, the worn booths, the chipped mugs, the flickering lights, but something in his eyes told her the question reached further than that. She glanced around briefly, taking in the space she had worked in for years, then back at him. "It is a place people come when they need something simple," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Food, warmth, maybe a little quiet." He watched her closely, like he was weighing every word, then gave a small nod. "And what do you think people deserve when they walk through that door?" he asked. Ava did not answer right away, her gaze drifting to the entrance, then back to him. "A fair chance," she said finally, her voice steady, and for the first time, something in his expression shifted, subtle but real, like a piece of a larger picture had just fallen into place. He leaned back slightly, studying her in silence for a moment longer than usual, and Ava felt it again, that quiet sense that she was part of something she did not fully understand yet. The diner noise carried on around them, unchanged, but the space between them felt different, charged in a way that was not visible but impossible to ignore. And as she turned to step away, she noticed his hand resting on the table, fingers tapping once, lightly, like he was counting something only he could see. And that was when she realized he had not come back just for the food. The question stayed with her longer than it should have, echoing quietly in the back of her mind even as the diner filled with the late morning crowd. Ava moved between tables with the same practiced rhythm, balancing plates along her forearm, refilling coffee without being asked, nodding politely at half-heard conversations. But something in her focus had shifted, like she was listening for something beneath the usual noise. Every time she passed the booth by the window, she felt his presence. Before she looked, and when she did, he was always the same, calm, observant, never rushing, never distracted, like he was not just sitting there, but studying the space itself, measuring it in ways she could not see. She placed a plate down at a nearby table, the clink of ceramic against laminate grounding her for a moment, then turned back toward the counter where the manager stood reviewing receipts, his expression tight as usual. "Table 4 wants their check," she said, setting the order. "Pad down." He nodded without looking up, then added, "And do not forget what I said," his tone low but firm. Ava paused, knowing exactly what he meant. "I have not," she replied, and for a moment there was a silence between them that felt heavier than the words exchanged. He finally looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to read something in her face. Then he glanced past her toward the booth, his jaw tightening just a fraction. "You think I do not see what is going on," he said, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Ava followed his gaze briefly, then back to him. "Nothing is going on," she said, keeping her voice steady. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. "People like him do not just show up twice," he said. "And people like you do not just keep giving things away." Ava felt a flicker of irritation, but she kept it contained. "Maybe it is not about the money," she said, and for a second, something in his expression shifted, like he did not have an immediate answer for that, but it passed quickly, replaced by the same controlled look. "Everything here is about money," he replied, turning back to his receipts, ending the conversation without saying so. Ava picked up the check for table 4 and walked away, but his words lingered, not because she agreed, but because they felt incomplete, like they were missing something she had started to see but could not yet explain. When she reached the booth again, the old man had finished most of his meal, the plate nearly empty, the coffee cup half full. She set the check down out of habit, then immediately realized the gesture did not make sense, and before she could pull it back, he looked at it, then at her, a faint hint of amusement in his eyes. "Old habits," she said quietly, sliding it away. He nodded once, then leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward the counter where the manager stood. "He runs this place like it is already failing," he said, not as criticism, just observation. Ava followed his gaze, then shook her head lightly. "He is just trying to keep it open," she replied, though even as she said it, she was not entirely sure she believed it the way she used to. The old man looked back at her, studying her again, that same careful attention that felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. "And you?" he said. "What are you trying to keep open?" Ava blinked, caught off guard by the question, her hand resting on the edge of the table as she searched for an answer that felt true. "I am just trying to get through the week," she said finally, a small, honest smile touching her lips. He watched her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging something unspoken in her answer. The diner noise swelled around them, orders being called, chairs scraping, a burst of laughter from the back corner, but the space between them remained oddly still, like a quiet pocket in the middle of everything. Ava straightened, picking up the empty plate. "I will bring you more coffee," she said, needing the movement, the routine, something to break the feeling that she was standing in the middle of something she did not fully understand. As she turned, she caught a glimpse of the manager watching again, his eyes moving quickly away when she met them, and for the first time, she noticed something beneath his usual control, not anger, not exactly, but tension, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. She poured fresh coffee, the dark liquid filling the pot with a steady stream, then returned to the booth, setting the cup down gently. The old man nodded in thanks, then reached for the mug. But before he lifted it, he paused, his fingers resting lightly against the handle, his gaze shifting past her toward the front window. Ava followed it instinctively. The sunlight had broken through more fully now, casting long reflections across the wet pavement outside. Cars passed by, their shapes clear again, ordinary, nothing unusual, and yet the way he watched made it feel like there was something she was not seeing, something just beyond the surface of what looked normal. She turned back to him, about to ask what he was looking at, but he spoke first. his voice quiet, almost thoughtful. "Tell me," he said, "if something here needed to change, would you notice before anyone else did?" Ava hesitated, the question settling into her mind with a weight she could not ignore. She glanced around the diner, at the customers, the counter, the manager, the worn edges of everything she had grown used to, then back at him. "I think I would," she said slowly, and as the words left her mouth, she realized she meant them more than she expected. He held her gaze for a second longer, then finally lifted the coffee cup, taking a slow sip, and Ava felt it again. That quiet shift, like something invisible, had just moved one step closer to the surface. And this time, she knew she was not imagining it, because across the room, the manager stopped what he was doing and looked up at the exact same moment. The manager's hand froze halfway through flipping a receipt, his eyes lifting toward the booth as if he had felt something shift without hearing a sound. Ava noticed it immediately, the way his posture tightened, the way his attention locked onto the old man for just a second too long before he forced himself to look back down. But the movement had already happened, subtle, almost invisible, and yet impossible to ignore once seen. Ava stood there with the coffee pot still in her hand, the warmth from it fading against her palm as her focus flickered between the two men. Something was connecting them now, not directly, not openly, but in a way that felt like tension stretching across the room. Thin and ready to snap, she turned back to the table slowly, setting the pot down, trying to ground herself in something simple, something routine. "Do you need anything else?" she asked, her voice steady but quieter than before. The old man did not answer right away, his gaze still angled toward the counter. Then after a moment he looked back at her, and whatever he had just noticed, he did not show it. "Not yet," he said, his tone calm as always. But there was a slight pause before the words, like he had chosen them carefully. Ava nodded once, then shifted her weight, unsure whether to stay or step away. The diner noise filled the space again, plates clattering, chairs scraping, someone laughing too loudly near the back. But underneath it, she could still feel that quiet tension, like a low hum just below hearing. She picked up the empty coffee pot and turned toward the counter, her movements automatic. But her attention remained divided. As she approached, the manager did not look up this time, his focus fixed on the register, but his jaw was set tighter than usual. "We need to talk," he said under his breath as she set the pot down. Ava paused, her fingers resting lightly on the counter. "About what?" she asked, though she already had a feeling. He glanced up. Briefly, his eyes sharp. "About boundaries," he said. The word clipped, controlled. Ava held his gaze for a second, then exhaled softly. "I am doing my job," she replied. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice even more. "Your job is to serve paying customers," he said, "not to make decisions about who deserves what." Ava felt something stir in her chest, not anger exactly, but something firmer, something that had been building since yesterday. "Maybe those are the same thing," she said, and this time, he did not have an immediate response, his expression flickering for just a moment before settling back into something harder. "You are going to cost this place," he said, straightening, "and when that happens, it will not just be on you." Ava looked at him, really looked at him, noticing the lines of stress around his eyes, the way his fingers tapped against the counter like he was keeping track of something constantly slipping. And for the first time, she saw that his control was not just authority, it was fear. She nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, then turned away before the conversation could stretch any further. As she moved back across the diner, she caught the old man, watching her again, not just casually, but with that same focused attention, like he had heard everything without being close enough to listen. She approached the table, setting down a fresh napkin without thinking, a small gesture to fill the silence. "He does not like me very much right now," she said lightly. Though the words carried more weight than she intended, the old man gave a faint nod. "He is protecting something," he replied. Ava tilted her head slightly. "What?" she asked. He looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the mug slowly. "What he believes this place is," he said. Ava followed his hand for a moment, then looked back at him. "And what do you think it is?" she asked, the question coming out before she could stop it. He met her gaze again, steady, unhurried. "Something that is not decided yet," he answered. And the way he said it made it sound less like an opinion and more like a possibility. Ava felt a quiet shift inside her, like a door she had not noticed before had just opened a fraction. She glanced around the diner again, at the worn booths, the tired lights, the people moving through it without thinking twice. And for the first time, she wondered what it could be instead of what it had always been. When she looked back at him, he was already watching her, as if waiting to see what she would do with that thought. "You ask a lot of questions," she said, a small smile touching her lips. He returned it, just barely. "Only when the answers matter," he said. Ava let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly, then stepped back, needing space to think, to move, to keep the rhythm of the diner from slipping completely out of her hands. As she turned, the bell above the door rang again, sharp this time. Drawing a few glances, Ava looked up instinctively, expecting another customer, another ordinary moment. But something in the way the light shifted through the doorway made her pause for half a second longer than usual, and she realized she was starting to notice things she never paid attention to before, small changes, subtle signals, the kind that usually passed by without meaning anything, except now they felt like they did. And as she moved toward the entrance to greet whoever had just walked in, she could not shake the feeling that the questions he was asking were beginning to change the way she saw everything around her, including what might be coming next, because this time, the person standing at the door was not looking for a table. The man at the door did not step inside right away. He just stood there holding it open, letting a strip of bright daylight cut across the diner floor. And for a moment it felt like everything slowed around that thin line of light. Ava stopped a few feet away, her hand still holding a menu she had picked up out of habit. But something in the way he carried himself told her he was not here for breakfast. His clothes were clean, pressed, not expensive in a flashy way but deliberate, like someone who chose function over display. And his eyes moved across the room quickly, not curious, not distracted, just scanning, until they landed on the booth by the window. Ava followed that gaze instinctively, her chest tightening slightly as she realized exactly who he was looking at. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice even. The man shifted his attention back to her, offering a polite nod. "I am looking for someone," he said, his tone professional, measured. Ava glanced again toward the booth, then back at him. "You can take a seat if you would like," she replied, not answering directly. He gave a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I do not think I will be staying," he said, and then he stepped inside fully, letting the door close behind him with a soft click. The bell chimed once, then settled. Ava moved slightly to the side, giving him space to pass, but her attention stayed fixed on him as he walked across the diner, each step steady, unhurried, the kind of movement that did not ask for attention but carried it anyway. A couple of customers glanced up, sensing the shift without understanding it. The manager looked up too, his expression tightening immediately, but he did not move from behind the counter. He just watched. Ava stayed near the entrance, the menu still in her hand, forgotten, as the man approached the booth. When he stopped, he did not speak right away. He simply stood there, and for the first time since she had known him, the old man looked up before anyone said a word, like he had been expecting this exact moment. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, silent, quick, but undeniable. The man gave a small nod, respectful, almost deferential. "Sir," he said, and the word landed differently than anything Ava had heard in the diner before. The old man did not respond immediately. He just studied him for a second, then leaned back slightly, his posture shifting in a way that made him seem less like a guest and more like someone receiving one. Ava felt her pulse pick up, her fingers tightening slightly around the menu. She took a step forward without realizing it, drawn by the change in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. The man turned his head slightly toward her, acknowledging her presence, but his attention returned to the old man almost immediately. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, addressing Ava briefly, then back to the booth. "We have been trying to reach you," he continued, and the words hung there, formal, controlled. The old man exhaled quietly, not annoyed, not surprised, just accepting. "I assumed you would," he replied. Ava blinked, the exchange unfolding in a way that did not fit anything she expected. The man shifted his stance slightly, lowering his voice. but not enough to be completely unheard. "There are matters that require your attention," he said. The old man glanced down at his coffee. "Then back up." "There always are," he answered, calm, almost detached. Ava stood there, caught between stepping closer and giving space, her instincts pulling in both directions at once. The manager finally moved from behind the counter, taking a few steps forward, his presence more noticeable now. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone controlled but edged with authority. The man at the booth turned to face him, his expression polite but firm. "No problem," he said. "Just a conversation." The manager's eyes flickered between the two of them, something uncertain passing through his usual confidence. Ava noticed it. The way his shoulders were not as steady as before, the way his voice did not come immediately. She looked back at the old man, who remained seated, completely at ease, like none of this was unexpected, like it was simply part of something larger already in motion. The man beside him leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further, this time too quiet for Ava to catch the words. But the tone was clear, respectful, urgent without being rushed. The old man listened without interrupting, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. Ava felt a strange sense of distance, like she was watching a scene from outside herself, something unfolding that she had been a part of without realizing it until now. The diner. Noise had softened again, conversations dropping just enough to make the moment stand out, even if no one else fully understood why. After a few seconds, the old man gave a small nod, a decision made without explanation. The man straightened immediately, as if that nod had been the only thing he was waiting for. Ava's eyes moved between them, trying to piece together what she was seeing, what it meant, why it felt so important. And then, as the man stepped back from the booth, he adjusted his sleeve slightly, and for just a fraction of a second, something caught the light, a small detail, precise, polished, and unmistakably out of place in a diner like this. Ava's breath slowed, her mind catching up to what her eyes had just noticed, and suddenly, the question she had been holding did not feel small anymore, because the way he stood there, the way he spoke, the way the other man responded, none of it matched the story she had been telling herself. And as the old man reached for his coffee again, completely unbothered, Ava realized she was no longer looking at a stranger trying to get through the day. She was looking at someone who had never needed help at all, and yet had chosen to sit there anyway, quietly, watching, waiting, until something in this place revealed itself. And now, whatever that something was, it had finally been seen, because the man at the door had not come to find him. He had come to report back. The word report lingered in Ava's mind even after the man stepped back, the shape of it settling into everything she thought she understood about the last 2 days, and quietly undoing it piece by piece. She stood near the edge of the aisle, no longer pretending to wipe tables or refill cups, her attention fixed completely on the booth by the window where the old man now sat with the same calm posture, as if nothing unusual had just happened. But everything about the room had shifted. She could feel it in the way conversations resumed a little too quickly, in the way the manager hovered closer than before without admitting why, in the way her own breathing had not fully returned to normal. The man in the pressed shirt gave one last respectful nod, then turned and walked toward the door without waiting for further instruction, his steps as controlled as when he entered, and when he reached the exit, he opened it just enough to slip through, letting only a thin slice of daylight spill. And before it closed again, the bell chimed once, then silence settled back in. But it was not the same silence as before. Ava moved slowly back toward the booth, each step more deliberate, like she was approaching something that required care, not fear, just awareness. The old man lifted his coffee cup, taking a measured sip, then set it down again, his eyes drifting briefly toward the window, then back to her as she stopped across from him. "You knew he was coming," she said, not accusing, not surprised, just stating what had become obvious. He gave a slight nod, not denying it. "I expected someone," he replied, his tone even. Ava folded her arms lightly, more to steady herself than anything else. "You did not seem worried," she added. He looked at her for a moment, then a faint hint of something softer crossed his expression. "Worry is not always useful," he said. Ava let out a quiet breath, glancing down at the table, then back at him, trying to reconcile the man she had seen yesterday with the one sitting in front of her now, and realizing they had always been the same. She had just been looking at him from the wrong angle. "Who are you?" she asked, the question coming out simpler than everything it carried. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached for the napkin beside his plate, folding it once, precisely, before placing it back down. "Someone who pays attention," he said. And it was not the answer she expected, but it did not feel like a lie either. Ava studied him, her instincts telling her there was more beneath that sentence, layers she could not yet see. "That man," she said, nodding slightly toward the door. "He was not here for breakfast." The old man allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "No, he was not," he agreed. Ava shifted her weight, the questions building faster now. But before she could ask another, the manager's voice cut in from behind her, sharper than before. "All right, that is enough," he said, stepping closer, his presence pressing into the space between them. Ava turned slightly, her expression tightening. "I am working," she replied, but he shook his head. "You are standing around," he corrected, then looked directly at the old man, his tone shifting to something more formal, more controlled. "Sir, if you are finished, we do need to free up the table." The words were polite, but the intent behind them was not. Ava felt a flicker of tension rise again, but the old man remained seated, completely unbothered. He looked up at the manager, his gaze steady. "I am not in a hurry," he said, simple, calm, and something in the way he said it made the manager hesitate for just a fraction of a second, enough for Ava to notice, enough for it to matter. "We have paying customers waiting," the manager added, pressing slightly, but the confidence in his voice was not as firm as before. The old man glanced around the diner briefly, taking in the half-filled booths, the empty seats near the counter, then returned his attention to the manager. "Do you?" he asked, not challenging, just observing. The manager's jaw tightened, his fingers curling slightly at his sides. Ava could see it now, the strain beneath his control, the uncertainty he was trying to keep hidden. "This is a business," he said, more forcefully this time, and Ava felt the words land differently now, not as a rule, but as a defense. The old man nodded slowly, as if considering that, then looked back at Ava, not at the manager, not at anyone else, just her. "And what do you think it is?" he asked again. The same question, but it felt heavier now, more urgent. Ava held his gaze, aware of the manager standing just behind her, aware of the room watching without understanding, aware that whatever she said next mattered in a way she could not fully explain. She took a small breath, steadying herself. "It is a place where people decide who matters," she said, her voice quiet but clear, the words settling into the space between them. And for a moment, no one spoke. The manager shifted slightly, as if about to interrupt, but stopped. The old man studied her, that same focused attention, but this time there was something else in it, something closer to recognition than evaluation. He gave a small nod, almost to himself, then leaned back slightly. His posture relaxed again, but the air around him felt different now, more defined, like the lines of something unseen were becoming visible. Ava felt it too. That quiet shift turning into something more solid, something that could not be ignored or dismissed. And as she stood there, caught between what she had always known and what was unfolding in front of her, she realized the question was no longer just his. It belonged to her now as well, because the way she answered it was already changing what this place was becoming. And across the room, unnoticed by most, the manager's hand slowly tightened into a fist against the edge of the counter, as if he understood that something had just slipped out of his control. The manager did not speak again right away, but the silence he left behind felt louder than anything he could have said. Ava could feel it pressing against her back as she stood between him and the booth, the weight of his presence shifting from authority to something less certain, something unsettled, and for the first time since she had worked there, she did not step aside to make space for it. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her posture calm but unmoving. The old man watched this without interrupting, his gaze steady, as if this moment mattered more than any question he had asked before. The diner continued around them, but slower now, like everyone sensed the change without knowing why. A fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. A conversation faded mid-sentence. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed more noticeable. The manager finally cleared his throat, the sound controlled but strained. "We are not running a shelter," he said, not looking at Ava this time, but speaking past her, toward the booth, toward the situation he could no longer ignore. Ava felt the words land, not as a command, but as a line drawn. She turned slightly, just enough to face him without fully stepping away from the table. "No one asked you to," she replied, her voice even, and for a second, the air tightened again. The manager's eyes narrowed, not in anger exactly, but in calculation, like he was trying to decide how far to push without losing something he could not afford to lose. The old man shifted slightly in his seat, not to intervene, but to observe more closely, his attention moving between them, measuring. Ava noticed it now, the way he never rushed to speak, never filled the silence unless it mattered, and somehow that made everything feel more deliberate. The manager took a small step forward, lowering his voice again. "You are crossing a line," he said. Ava met his gaze, steady, not challenging, just present. "Maybe the line is in the wrong place," she answered, and this time, the words did not feel like they came from habit or instinct. They came from something that had been building since the first morning, something she had not named until now. The manager's expression shifted, the control slipping just enough to reveal the strain beneath it. His eyes flickered briefly toward the booth, then back to her, and Ava realized he was not just reacting to her anymore. He was reacting to what he could not explain. The old man leaned back slightly, his fingers resting loosely on the table, his posture relaxed but attentive, like someone watching a test unfold. Ava felt that again, the quiet certainty that this was not random, that nothing about the last 2 days had been accidental. She turned back to the table, her focus returning to him. "You asked what this place is," she said, her voice softer now, but clearer. "I think it depends on what we choose to do when it matters." The old man studied her for a long moment, the kind of silence that did not feel empty, but full, like something was being weighed carefully. Then he gave a small nod, slower this time, more deliberate. "And what do you choose?" he asked. Ava did not hesitate, not this time. "I choose to treat people like they matter before I know who they are," she said, and the words settled into the space between them with a quiet finality. Behind her, the manager shifted again, a small movement. But Ava felt it, the tension in it, the resistance, the uncertainty. The old man's gaze did not leave hers, and for the first time, there was no distance in it, no evaluation, just recognition. He reached for his coffee, lifting it slowly, then paused before taking a sip. "That is a costly choice," he said. Ava gave a faint smile, one that did not hide the truth behind it. "It already is," she replied. And in that moment, something in the air changed again, but this time it was not tension, it was clarity, the kind that settles quietly but stays, the kind that makes everything that follows feel inevitable. The manager exhaled sharply, turning away for a moment as if to reset himself, to regain control, but when he turned back, his posture was not the same. There was something more cautious in it now, something aware. Ava noticed it, and so did the old man, though neither of them said anything. The diner noise began to return, slowly, cautiously, like the room was testing whether it was safe to move again. Ava picked up the empty coffee pot from the edge of the table, her movements steady, grounded, but her mind no longer felt uncertain. The questions that had been building were no longer just questions. They were becoming answers, and as she turned to walk back toward the counter, she felt the weight of the moment settle into something solid, something that would not simply pass. Because whatever this was, whatever had started with a quiet act of kindness, it had grown into something that was beginning to reveal itself, piece by piece. And this time, she was not just part of it, she was shaping it. And behind her, at the booth by the window, the old man finally took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes lifting toward the front door again, as if he was not waiting anymore, but expecting. The diner settled into a strange kind of rhythm after that, not quite normal, but not entirely tense either, like something had shifted just enough that no one could pretend it had not. Ava moved behind the counter with steady hands, pouring coffee, stacking plates, calling out orders, but everything felt sharper now, more defined, like the edges of the room had come into focus. She noticed the way customers watched without looking like they were watching, The way conversations dipped whenever she passed the booth. The way the manager checked the register more often than necessary, as if numbers could ground him in something certain. She reached for a clean mug, the ceramic cool against her fingers, then glanced toward the window again. The old man sat exactly as before, but not as before. There was a presence to him now that had not been visible when she first saw him standing in the rain, something quiet but undeniable, like the difference between a shadow and the object casting it. She carried the mug over, refilling his coffee without being asked, the dark liquid rising smoothly, steam curling upward in thin, steady lines. "You are waiting for something," she said, not as a question this time. He watched the coffee settle, then lifted his gaze to hers. "Not waiting," he replied. "Allowing." Ava tilted her head slightly, the word landing differently than she expected. "Allowing what?" she asked. He rested his hand lightly on the table, fingers relaxed. "For things to show themselves," he said. And again, it was not a direct answer, but it felt like one. Ava studied him for a moment, then let out a quiet breath, glancing toward the door. The sunlight outside had grown brighter, reflecting off the pavement in long, clean lines. The rain was completely gone now, replaced by a crisp clarity that made everything look sharper than usual. She turned back to him. "You already know what you are going to do, do not you?" she said. And for the first time, he did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting slightly, not away, but inward, like he was considering the shape of the question rather than the words themselves. "I know what I will not do," he said finally. Ava felt that. Settled differently, more solid. "And what is that?" she asked. He looked at her again, steady, certain. "I will not ignore what I have seen," he answered, and the weight of that sentence landed quietly but completely. Ava felt a small shift in her chest, something aligning, something that made the last 2 days feel less random and more like part of something unfolding. She nodded once, not fully understanding yet, but no longer confused either. Behind her, the manager's voice rose slightly as he spoke to a supplier on the phone, his tone tighter than usual, more controlled, like he was trying to hold something together that kept slipping. Ava glanced back briefly, noticing the way his free hand tapped against the counter in a steady, restless rhythm. Then she returned her attention to the table. "He thinks you are a problem," she said quietly, not unkindly, just honest. The old man allowed a faint smile. "That is often the first sign," he said. Ava raised an eyebrow slightly. "Of what?" she asked. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then set the mug down carefully, the sound soft but precise. "Of something changing," he replied. Ava let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but it carried more understanding than humor. She looked around the diner again, really looked this time, at the worn edges of the booths, the faded menu board, the way the sunlight now touched places it had not earlier, and she realized she was seeing it differently, not as something fixed, but as something that could shift, could become something else depending on the choices made inside it. She turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. "You asked me what I would notice," she said. He nodded slightly. She hesitated for a second, then continued. "I think I am starting to see it," she admitted, and the words felt like crossing a line she could not step back from. He held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod, not as praise, but as acknowledgement, like she had reached a point he expected she would. The diner noise carried on around them, but it no longer felt like background. It felt like part of something larger, something building quietly. Ava stepped back slightly, her hand brushing against the edge of the table, grounding herself again. "Whatever this is," she said, "it is not small, is it?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked past her toward the front door, his expression calm but focused, like he was tracking something just out of sight. Ava followed his gaze instinctively, the glass reflecting the bright street outside. Cars passing, nothing unusual at first glance, but then she noticed it. The way one car slowed just slightly as it passed, the way another followed at a measured distance, subtle, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. She turned back to him, her pulse picking up just enough to notice. He did not look surprised. He did not even look concerned. He simply reached for his coffee again, as if everything was unfolding exactly as expected. Ava felt the shift fully now, no longer a question, no longer a possibility, but something real, something moving toward them whether they understood it or not. And as she stood there, caught between the familiar and the unknown, she realized that whatever came next would not just reveal who he was. It would reveal what this place had truly become, because outside, the cars were no longer just passing by. They were starting to slow down. The first SUV did not stop right away. It rolled past the diner slowly, its dark surface reflecting the sunlight in a way that made it look almost unreal against the worn edges of the street. Ava stood near the window now, no longer pretending to be busy, her eyes tracking its movement as it continued down the block, and for a moment she thought that was all it would be, just another car passing through, until a second one followed, then a third, each moving at the same measured pace, spaced evenly, deliberate. Her breath slowed, not out of calm but out of focus, the kind that comes when something unfamiliar begins to take shape in front of you. Behind her, a fork clinked loudly against a plate. Someone muttered under their breath, the sound of the diner shifting again, reacting without fully understanding. Ava turned slightly, her gaze flickering toward the booth. The old man had not moved, not even slightly, his posture unchanged, his hand resting near his coffee cup, his eyes still directed toward the window, as if he had already seen this before it happened. The manager stepped forward from the counter, drawn by the same movement outside, his brows tightening as he followed Ava's line of sight. "What is going on?" he said, more to himself than anyone else. Ava did not answer. She did not have one. The third SUV slowed further, then the fourth appeared, turning onto the street with the same quiet precision, the line forming not by accident, but by intention. Ava felt something shift fully into place now, not a question, not a possibility, but an arrival. She glanced back at the old man again, expecting some reaction, some acknowledgement, but he remained exactly as he was, calm, composed, almost distant, like the scene unfolding outside was simply catching up to something he already understood. "You knew," she said quietly, not moving from the window. His voice came from behind her, steady, unhurried. "I expected," he replied. Ava swallowed lightly, the difference between the two words settling deeper than she thought it would. The manager took another step closer, his presence now tense, uncertain, his eyes darting between the window and the booth. "Do you have something to do with this?" he asked, the question directed at the old man, but carried through Ava. The old man did not respond immediately. He simply reached for his coffee, lifting it slowly, taking a measured sip as the fifth SUV came into view, the sound of engines now noticeable, low but steady, the kind that fills space without raising its voice. Customers began to turn in their seats, conversations dropping off completely now, attention shifting toward the front of the diner. Ava could feel it all pressing inward, the moment narrowing, focusing. The manager's voice sharpened slightly. "Sir, I am going to need an answer," he said. But there was something different in his tone now, not authority, not quite, something closer to uncertainty. The old man set his cup down carefully, the sound soft but clear, and then he looked at him, not dismissive, not confrontational, just steady. "You already have one," he said. Ava felt that land before she fully understood it. The manager blinked, his expression tightening. "I do not know what that means," he replied, and this time, there was no attempt to hide it. The uncertainty was visible. Ava turned back toward the window as the first SUV finally slowed to a stop directly in front of the diner, its engine idling, the dark glass reflecting the neon sign and the movement inside. One by one, the others followed, lining up along the curb with the same precision. The street that had felt open moments ago now felt contained, defined by their presence. Ava's pulse picked up slightly, not fear, not exactly, but the awareness that something irreversible was happening. She glanced back again. The old man was watching the door now, not the window, his attention fixed on the entrance like he was no longer observing but waiting. The manager followed his gaze, then looked back at Ava, as if expecting her to explain something she did not yet have words for. "This is not normal," he said, and for once, there was no control in it, just fact. Ava nodded slowly. "No," she agreed, her voice quieter now, but steadier, and in that moment, she realized she was not reacting the same way he was. She was not trying to stop it, not trying to understand it fast enough to contain it. She was letting it unfold, the way the old man had said, allowing it. The engines outside continued to idle, a low, steady presence, the sunlight reflecting off the black surfaces, turning them into mirrors that distorted the world around them. Ava took a small step back from the window, her focus shifting fully to the door now, the space between breaths stretching just slightly longer. And then, without warning, the first car door opened, the sound clean and precise, cutting through the silence inside the diner. Ava felt the moment settle, solid and undeniable, and she knew there was no going back to what this had been before, because whatever was about to walk through that door was not coming to order breakfast, and it was not coming by accident. It was coming with purpose, with intention, with answers she had not yet asked out loud. And as she stood there, caught between the life she knew and the one stepping toward her, she realized the quiet kindness that started all of this had just reached its breaking point, because now, it was about to be seen by everyone. The car door closed with a soft, deliberate sound that carried farther than it should have, and for a moment no one inside the diner moved, as if the entire room had decided, silently, to wait. Ava stood a few steps from the entrance now, her body still but her senses sharpened, every detail pulling into focus, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the ticking of the wall clock, the low idle of engines outside. Then footsteps approached, measured, unhurried, and the door opened. The bell chimed once, clean and clear. A man stepped inside dressed in a dark suit that fit him too precisely to be ordinary, his posture straight, his eyes calm but alert. And the moment he crossed the threshold, the air in the diner shifted again, not louder, not heavier, just more defined, like something had taken shape in the space. He paused just inside, scanning briefly, not with curiosity but with recognition. And then his gaze settled directly on the booth by the window. Ava felt her breath slow, her eyes following the line of his attention. Behind her, the manager took a step forward, instinct pushing him to regain control. "Can I help you?" he said, his voice firm but lacking the confidence it usually carried. The man in the suit turned his head slightly toward him, offering a polite nod that acknowledged the question without engaging it fully. "I am here to see him," he said, his tone even, respectful, and unmistakably certain. Ava felt something steady inside her, not fear, not confusion, but clarity, the kind that comes when a question finally meets its answer. The man walked past her, not brushing against her, not rushing, just moving with purpose, and as he passed, she caught a faint scent of clean linen and something sharper, professional, deliberate, the kind of detail that did not belong in a place like this. He reached the booth and stopped, standing straight, his hands loosely at his sides. "Sir," he said, the word landing with quiet respect. The old man looked up slowly, meeting his gaze, and for the first time since this began, there was no distance in his expression, only acknowledgement, like the pieces had finally aligned. "You took your time," the old man said, his voice calm, almost conversational. The man inclined his head slightly. "We wanted to be certain," he replied. Ava felt that sentence settle into the room, subtle but heavy. The manager stepped closer now, unable to stay on the edge any longer. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tighter, more urgent. The man turned toward him again, his expression still polite, but now there was a firmness to it. "This is a private matter," he said, and though the words were simple, the way he said them left no room for argument. The manager hesitated, his mouth opening slightly as if to respond, then closing again. Ava watched it happen, the shift in power not loud or dramatic, but undeniable. She turned back to the booth, her attention fully on the old man now. He reached for his coffee again, but this time he did not drink. He simply held the cup, his fingers resting against it as if grounding the moment. "Have you seen enough?" the man in the suit asked quietly. The old man glanced at Ava for just a second before answering, and that single glance carried more weight than anything spoken. "Yes," he said. Simple. Final. Ava felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not regret, just the awareness that whatever came next would change everything. The man nodded once, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a small folder, sleek, dark, and placing it carefully on the table without opening it. "Then we are ready," he said. Ava's eyes moved to the folder, then back to the old man. questions rising but not yet forming into words. The manager stepped forward again, unable to hold back. Ready for what? He demanded. And this time, there was no attempt to soften it. The old man finally looked at him directly, his gaze steady, calm, but no longer passive. For what comes next, he replied, and the words did not sound like a warning. They sounded like a conclusion. Ava felt the shift fully now, the quiet test, the questions, the observation, all of it leading here, the diner, the worn booths, the smell of coffee and grease, everything. Suddenly felt like a stage that had just revealed its purpose. She looked around briefly, seeing it differently now, not as a place she worked, but as something that had been seen, measured, understood. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, giving space, not to Ava, not to the manager, but to the moment itself, and in that space, the old man set his coffee cup down, the sound soft but final. Ava felt her hands steady at her sides, her mind no longer racing, just present, just aware. Because whatever this was, she had already chosen her place in it, long before she knew what it meant, and now, as the room held its breath, she realized the decision had never been about him at all. It had always been about what she would do when it mattered most, because the old man was no longer just sitting at the booth, he was about to stand. He stood slowly, not with effort, but with intention, the movement controlled and unhurried. And as he rose from the booth, something in the room shifted with him, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that every pair of eyes seemed to follow without meaning to. Ava felt it in the way her breath caught just slightly, in the way the space around him no longer felt like it belonged to the diner at all. The man in the suit straightened instinctively, his posture aligning with the motion as if it had been rehearsed, while the manager remained where he was, frozen between stepping forward and stepping back, unsure which direction still belonged to him. The old man adjusted his coat lightly, smoothing the front with a small, precise gesture, then looked around the diner once, not scanning, not evaluating, just taking it in, the worn tables, the chipped edges, the quiet faces watching, and then his gaze settled on Ava, steady, present, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. You chose before you knew, he said, his voice calm, carrying just enough to reach her without needing to be raised. Ava felt the words land deeper than anything that had been said so far, not as praise, not as surprise, but as recognition. She took a small step closer without thinking, her hands steady at her sides. I did what felt right, she replied, and even now, even here, the answer remained simple, unchanged. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that did not need elaboration, then turned slightly toward the table, his hand resting on the folder the man had placed there earlier. He did not open it right away. Instead, he looked toward the manager, who stood a few feet away, tension visible in every line of his posture. You said this is a business, the old man said, his tone even, not confrontational, just direct. The manager straightened slightly, instinct returning in fragments. It is, he answered, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. The old man gave a small nod, as if accepting that, then placed his hand flat against the folder. Then you understand decisions, he continued. Ava watched the exchange closely, feeling the weight of it settle into the room. The manager hesitated, his gaze flickering to the folder, then back to the old man. What kind of decisions? He asked, and there it was, the question that had been building, spoken out loud at last. The old man opened the folder slowly, the sound of the paper shifting inside quiet but clear. He did not rush, did not dramatize. He simply turned it so it faced the manager, then stepped back half a step, giving him space to see, to read, to understand. Ava could not see the contents from where she stood, but she saw the effect immediately. The manager's expression changed, not all at once, but in layers, confusion first, then recognition, then something deeper, something that looked like the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, his eyes moving across the page as if trying to catch up to what it meant. This is not, he began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The man in the suit remained still, his attention focused, waiting. The old man watched quietly, not pressing, not explaining, allowing the moment to unfold exactly as it needed to. Ava felt her pulse steady, not racing anymore, just present, just aware, She looked from the manager to the old man, understanding now that whatever was written there was not a threat, not a trick, but a truth being revealed. The manager finally looked up, his face no longer controlled, no longer certain. "You cannot just," he started again, but the words did not hold. They fell away before they could form. The old man met his gaze, calm, unwavering. "It is already done," he said, and the sentence settled into the room with quiet finality. Ava felt it, the shift from possibility to reality, from question to answer. The manager took a step back without meaning to, his hand brushing against the edge of the counter as if to steady himself, his eyes moving again to the folder, then back to Ava for a brief second, as if searching for something familiar, something unchanged. But she did not move. She did not look away, because she understood now that this moment was not about holding on to what had been. It was about seeing what was becoming. The old man closed the folder gently, the sound soft, controlled, then turned back to Ava once more, his expression unchanged, but the meaning behind it clearer than ever. "You saw this place before it knew what it was," he said. Ava felt a quiet warmth settle beneath the tension, not overwhelming, not loud, just steady. "I just treated people like they mattered," she replied, and the simplicity of it held. Even now, especially now, he gave a slight nod, then looked toward the door, where the line of dark vehicles waited silently, not imposing, just present, like the final piece of something that had already been decided. The man in the suit stepped forward slightly, ready, but not rushing, and for a moment, everything paused again. Balance between what had just been revealed and what would follow. Ava stood there, no longer uncertain, no longer searching for meaning, because it was already here, in the choices she had made without knowing who was watching, without knowing what it would lead to. And as the old man took a step away from the booth, leaving behind the space he had occupied so quietly, she realized that nothing in this diner would ever feel the same again, because the moment had passed where it could remain what it was, and now it was becoming something else entirely, something shaped not by rules or roles, but by what had been chosen when it mattered most. And just before he turned toward the door, he paused, his gaze returning to her one last time. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, not to linger, not to dramatize, but to make sure something unspoken had fully landed, and Ava felt it, not as pressure, not as expectation, but as something steady, something that would remain long after he walked out that door. The diner around them stayed quiet, not frozen, just aware, like every sound had learned to wait its turn. He gave the slightest nod, then turned, his steps measured as he moved toward the entrance. The man in the suit fell in beside him without a word, matching his pace. The door opened, the bell chimed. Once, and sunlight spilled in again, brighter now, cleaner, stretching across the floor in a long, clear line. Ava watched as he stepped through it, not looking back this time, not needing to, because whatever needed to be said had already been understood. Outside, the line of SUVs remained still, engines low, doors closed. Waiting, the man walked past them without hesitation, and as he approached the first vehicle, one of the doors opened smoothly, not rushed, not forced, just timed. He paused for half a second before getting in, his hand resting briefly on the top of the door, and though Ava could not hear him, she saw the way he spoke to the man beside him. A few quiet words, calm, deliberate, the kind that did not need to be repeated. Then he stepped inside, the door closed, and one by one, the vehicles began to move, not all at once, but in sequence, each pulling away with the same controlled motion they had arrived with, the street slowly returning to its normal rhythm as the last one disappeared down the block. Ava stood by the door a moment longer, the sunlight still touching the floor where they had been. Then she turned back inside. The diner felt different now, not changed in its shape, but in its weight, like something invisible had settled into it, something that could not be undone. Behind the counter, the manager still stood with the folder in his hands, though he was not reading it anymore. He was just holding it, staring at it as if it might explain itself if he waited long enough. Ava walked toward him slowly, not rushing, not cautious, just present. She stopped a few feet away, her hands relaxed at her sides. He looked up at her, his expression no longer sharp, no longer controlled, just uncertain. "Do "You know what this means?" he asked, and for the first time, there was no authority in the question, only the need for an answer. Ava glanced briefly at the folder, then back at him. "It means you were not wrong," she said quietly. He frowned slightly, confused. "About what?" he asked. Ava met his gaze, steady. "It is a business," she replied, then added. "But it is also a choice." The words settled between them, simple, but heavier than anything that had been said before. The manager looked down at the folder again, his grip loosening slightly. As if the weight of it had shifted from his hands to something deeper, he exhaled slowly, the tension leaving him in pieces rather than all at once. "I was trying to keep it from falling apart," he said, almost to himself. Ava nodded, understanding that now, seeing it clearly. "I know," she said, and she did, not as an excuse, not as a justification, just as truth. He looked up at her again, something different in his eyes now, not certainty, not control, but something closer to awareness. "And you think this is better?" he asked, not defensive, just searching. Ava glanced around the diner, the same tables, the same chairs, the same light now filling the room more fully than before, and yet it all felt different. "I think this is clearer," she said. The manager followed her gaze, seeing the same space, but not the same way. "Not anymore," he nodded slowly. Not in agreement, not completely, but in recognition that something had shifted beyond what he could return to. He closed the folder gently, setting it down on the counter as if placing something important exactly where it belonged. Ava picked up a coffee pot, her movement steady, familiar, but her perspective no longer the same. She walked back toward the booth by the window, now empty, the seat still slightly indented, the faint outline of where he had sat lingering for just a moment before fading. She set a clean mug down out of habit, then paused, a small smile touching her lips as she realized there was no one to serve, at least not in the way there had been before. The sunlight shifted slightly, moving across the table, catching the edge of the cup, reflecting a soft, steady glow. Ava rested her hand lightly on the back of the chair, grounding herself in the present, in the space that had held something more than just a customer. And as the diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm, conversations rising, plates moving, life continuing, she understood that nothing about what had happened needed to be announced or explained. It would remain in the way the place felt, in the way choices were made from this point forward, in the quiet understanding that had settled into its walls. And as she turned back toward the counter, ready to continue the work she had always done, she carried that understanding with her, not as a burden, not as a reward, but as something simple and steady, the same way it had begun, because in the end, he did not change the diner. He revealed what it could become, and that was enough, because the next person who walked through that door would not be invisible anymore.